Blake, it seems like only yesterday I was on the beginning of this damn podcast telling everyone about a book that I was writing. And here, today, we're doing it again, but it's not me anymore. It's you this time.
That's right. They let a young buck into the Library of Congress, baby. They're giving me an ISBN number, baby. I'm writing a book, folks.
What's the book about, Blake?
It's about Guitar Hero, Rock Band, and the music game boom of the mid to late 2000s. Jacob, if you'll allow me to do my pitch, I've been working on it.
All right.
And by working on it, I mean this is the first time I'm doing it. Back in 2020, folks, I reported a too long for the internet story about the making of Guitar Hero. I interviewed over 30 people. I believe 34,000 words long. It ran on Vice.
You got paid like $4 per each of those people, right, Blake?
Yeah, well, you know what? Yeah, that's right. I'm not worried about the pay because between me and Vice, only one of us is still alive.
That's true.
But somehow that wasn't the whole story because I was missing crucial games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero 3. And so, along with the publisher Thames and Hudson and their arm Volume, I'm putting out a book that expands it, does new interviews, basically writes the second half of the story that I did not get to do in my original oral history.
Right, because your oral history was kind of like, can we make a game about guitars? And then, like, it got, at the end, it was like, yeah, we can make a game about guitars. And, like, reading that, I was like, okay, but hold on. Like, there's a lot that happened after this.
Yeah, something missed in that story is how in a couple years later, one of those games made $1 billion freaking dollars. So
yeah, and then, like, 5 years after that, they didn't make any more of them.
Yeah, they made zero. They made something rotten money a few years after that. So we're turning it into a book. It is crowdfunding now on Volume's website. There's a standard, cheaper edition of the book that you can get. It'll probably run you about $55. And then there is a deluxe edition that comes in a hard shell case. All of those are signed by me. So if you ever wanted my damn signature, there you go. But more interesting, perhaps, is the premium Harmonix edition. Jacob, signed by 4 original Guitar Hero developers, Alex Rogopoulos and Eran Agosi, the founders of Harmonix. 2 people, I think it's no exaggeration to say, have created an uncountable amount of musicians in the probably 25 to 30 years since they founded Harmonix. Ryan Lesser, the former art director of Harmonix, who defined the look of Guitar Hero and Rock Band for years and years and years. And then Greg LaPiccolo, who not only crafted the technology, like the note charts Harmonix is known for, also worked at freaking Looking Glass Games on like games like Thief. This is literally like 4 game developer legends. I literally bought my own version of this book just to make sure I would have these signatures.
It's crazy that if you had like a copy of Rock Band that was signed by all of those people, you could sell it on eBay for like $300. And instead it's like, hey, come on, buy this book. It's like $100.
$100. So there's a bunch of different options. It is funding for about a month as of the time you're hearing this. So please go buy it. And if you can't buy it, please tell your friends to go buy it. And then later, when you can afford it,
say, hey, you shop for me for Christmas starting right now.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's it. I got so jealous of Jacob's damn book. I said, my turn.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Something Rotten. It's the beginning of a new season. A kind of strange combination of game season that we could perhaps insensitively refer to as the Voices in Your Head season, because today we are talking about Indica, and soon we will be talking about Hellblade 2. But today is all about Indica. We've played the whole game. We're going to talk about the whole thing in this episode. My name is Jacob Geller, and I am joined, as always, by my host, Blake Hester.
My God, Jacob, the devil and God are raging inside of me. When I proposed this season, it really was just like, I want to play Indica and I want to play Hellblade and I need an excuse to do that. I didn't actually realize Indica was a game where someone in your head is talking to you the entire time, which makes the narrative cohesion unexpected but perfect. So it all worked out in the end, but nevertheless the devil and God are raging inside of me.
Blake, before we get into this, I feel like we just need to, put at least one thing up front, which is that I've asked you many questions about religion and specifically Catholicism before, because you went to Catholic school.
And I'm not,
right?
And I'm not Catholic. So there you go.
Well,
no one in my family is Catholic. I was never raised Catholic. In fact, I had to do that thing in school where you go and you don't get communion, and they're like, "Oh, there, bless you," but you don't get the cracker. But here's the thing about going to Catholic school. People always are like, "Oh, it's so terrible. It's so terrible." The only public school I ever went to was technically college, and that's the only school I never finished. So I think Catholic school actually was better for me in the long run.
The Catholics had it. When you were not taking communion, did you ever see someone open their mouth and then a small little man jumped out?
Yeah, that's a big Catholic thing. It's really weird. It's the little man you carry around as a Catholic. It's like, you know how Christians have the devil on their shoulder? Catholics have the devil in their mouth the whole time.
A little guy in their mouth.
Yeah.
In this discussion about Indica, a very religious game, we have brought perhaps one of the most qualified guests we could have found for this, because not only has Riley MacLeod, one of the founders of Aftermath, one of my new favorite game sites to go to, not only did you write a review of Indica, but you also went to Divinity School. And so we've really got, we're batting 1,000 here. Riley, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to talk about it.
I have perhaps a dumb question, Riley. I had at least a friend that went to school to become a priest, though I don't believe, since he's not a priest and he works at a breakout, one of those escape rooms. I don't think he graduated. But what is that Divinity School, or are those two separate things?
They are two separate things.
Okay.
Seminary, which is usually run by a specific denomination that you have to go to be ordained in your specific denomination, whereas Divinity School is more academic, or more people will go to Divinity School and then go on to seminary, or they'll get PhDs, or sometimes I've used it interchangeably, but it's not interchangeable. The one I went to, I guess, was maybe technically Unitarian, and I'm going to sound like an asshole. I went to Harvard, which is, I think was
first Harvard guest on Something Rotten.
Yeah,
let's
sorry.
go.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you're not supposed to say it because it makes you sound like a jerk. And I was the stupidest kid at the school. It's not like you go on to be a businessman school.
So when you went to Divinity School, was this? I assume you were not this is preparation for my job in games journalism, but
No.
were you aiming to do something religious with it, or was it kind of I have a political science degree, I was not trying to be a politician, it was just a subject area that I found really fascinating?
Yeah, I grew up sort of nominally Jewish, and then like many Jews became a Buddhist. I think if you're a Buddhist or a Jew, that's a very funny joke. And was really serious about Buddhism, and had taken lay vows and wanted to do that, and went to Harvard, which was not a Buddhist school, so it was sort of a little, the offerings there educationally for me were either like hyper specific or hyper broad, and then I got into anarchism and anarchist politics, and I got really angry, and I got really angry about American Buddhism, and that all so it sort of shifted to doing more like religion and politics, or religion and culture, and like super interested in how religion plays out in activism, and specifically leftist activism, how we talk about religion in games and art. I was a prison chaplain for a little bit with the Jesuits, which was very cool. And I think if I could live my life over, I would want to be a Jesuit. I'm not Catholic. A lot of things about my life would be easier if I were Christian, but I don't think that I am. And so, yeah, I'm just was really excited about Indica, because I'm just always really excited about how art thinks about religion, what faith looks like when portrayed in art and stuff like that. So, yeah, I feel like now I'm just like, everyone's awkward religious friend in a space that is, no, you don't often find that, I think.
I mean, I appreciated that about like how you put that in your review, and myself as someone who is pretty Jewish, though in the kind of like Jewish and like I figured out my own version of what that means, and I'm not exactly, lining up with anyone's exact definition of it except my own. I think one of the things that I appreciated with your review was kind of the frustration at like I can't find anything that quite talks about religion in like the way that I want to see it talked about. Before we jump into Indica, you mentioned this game, Uriel's Chasm 2, in your review. What are like the big talking about religion games? We on Something Rotten, we've made lists of different games, most notably games in which you can see penises in them, which Indica does not quite satisfy, though.
No.
You could imagine that it happens. But yeah, what are the big games that kind of talk about religion, and are there any that do it well?
I mean, I think it's hard. I actually wrote a little article about this on aftermath.site, my website that you can read, person listening to this. I think that games often don't. I think that they often, religion is a stand-in for the enemy. I mean, like Halo, I guess, has a religion. You think about like BioShock Infinite, right? And it's always this sort of I feel that it's this very basic kind of look at just like the organization of religion. It's an easy stand-in for bad guys because it's an easy stand-in for like an ideology. I was thinking the other day about that Dragon Cancer, which I don't know if you all remember, which was an indie game.
Yeah.
Some folks made about their young son dying of cancer, and I think that game actually does a really good job talking about faith. I think that it's very explicitly religious, and it grapples with how it feels to be religious. And I think I wrote in my review, I kind of had wanted Indica to, I'm going to say like feel more religious. I don't want to hold it up for not being what I wish it were, which is like such a crappy thing to like do it's an okay way to feel, but it's not a way to be like, in my review, I wish this game were, the game that I have in my head, which is, not a fair critique.
No, but I've said exactly the same thing about, I love the modern Wolfenstein games, but like, if I could tweak something, I'm like, I wish they made BJ like more, I wish they made him interact with Judaism. I think that would be cool. And it's like, I think that they're still more thoughtful than like virtually any other first-person shooter out there, but like, it's like taking that step into actual interaction with religious ideas seems like one that games are scared to do, unless it is your BioShock or, any other game where it's kind of like church is bad, and then maybe it's like a made-up church, or maybe it is like the Christian church, but in almost all cases it is kind of like we've made up this like very one that is specifically evil in the way that our game plot is asking for.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that with like Far Cry 5, right, which is about a cult, and I'm very interested in alternative religions and just sort of how people believe very strange things. And so to me, the actual cult, when you start digging into like what does it believe and what does it do, like kind of makes no sense. Like, I don't know if there are many cults in that vein that are like, we're just going to convert people with guns. Like, I'm not sure that's how they work. I'm not sure that is like I mean, obviously the game is at a message about how to not end up at a cult, but like, don't get held at gunpoint by a cult seems like a good advice, I guess, but not broadly applicable. And so that always seems like such a missed opportunity to me. But
Blake, you were excited about this game. I also feel like, how much did you know about it before you started playing? Was it just like none game?
Yeah, very little. I'd seen some just like little clips going around, and I was like, this seems like a Blake-ass game. And by God, it sure was a Blake-ass game. Yeah, I really didn't know much about it. The one thing that I accidentally spoiled for myself was the like 16-bit levels, which I was like looking at the Steam page and saw those, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. I wish that would have been a fun surprise. But I really only like I had never even heard of the game until reviews dropped, and then I started seeing like little clips of the guy popping out of the lady's mouth, and the fact you play as a nun seemingly just walking through the Russian hillside. Had no clue it would become like kind of a weird steampunk thing later in the game, and the architecture would totally break. But so I went in fairly blind. I had some semblance of an idea that it was about a nun going through a crisis of faith. As someone who like has as A$AP Rocky once said, their own relationship with God, but is like very much not tied to a specific religion. The thing I found most interesting about the game was the way it verbalized a lot of my frustrations with, I guess, like religious views of God and like things I don't know that I had ever been able to verbalize. I felt like the game did, which was like a pleasant outcome. Like, I really like the line, like when they talk about, so no one can ever genuinely love God. I was like, oh, that's kind of like something I've always thought about with religion. And it's like, it's a game that actually made me think a little more than I expected to. Because I went into it being like, I got to see the kooky guy popping out of someone's mouth. But yeah, it was really great. This game fucking rocks.
Yeah, I feel like before we get into the like the real kind of philosophical conversations of it, I want to take maybe a while to talk about the aesthetics of everything, because we've both talked about like, this is the moment that I clicked in. This is the moment where I like figured out what the game was doing. And Indica might have the fastest possible like I'm clicked in, because it's starting with like the first like 15 seconds are this kind of strange, unexpected, like 16-bit character falling down. And then as soon as it opens, this game hits you with its baseball bat of cinematography, which it's using in every single scene, where it's like the first shot of the game is Kyle Hilliard on MinMax referred to. Do y'all know that video of like the British guy who gets really excited about trains? And he has, like, the 360 GoPro attached to his head, and so his face is all, like, warped and kind of fisheye. It's like, that's kind of the shot that it starts you with, where it's, like, a fisheye attached to Indica's forehead that's just, like, rotating and swinging around with her. And it really doesn't stop being that kind of visually inventive throughout almost the whole game.
We've talked about this several times on the show, how, like, the least interesting thing in a game is often the camera. Like, mm-hmm. And we talk about like when the camera is interesting, like Kane and Lynch 2 is the obvious example we always bring up. It's like that game has an interesting camera, and this isn't doing anything in gameplay, I think, with the camera that's interesting, but the ways it is like constantly experimenting with the camera in cutscene, especially for a game that is ostensibly fairly not super high budget, like is really leaning on Unreal just being like a very formidable engine. Like, it feels like they're doing stuff that's, like, constantly kind of punching above their weight class with the game that is, like, kind of buggy and chunky and hard to play. And then you see, like, the dog cutscene, which is, like, very technically impressive. And it's like, they're really going for it here in a way I truly admire.
Yeah, it's such a cool-looking game. And I had interviewed the developers, and they came out of architecture, which makes sense, and I think wanted to reference, you know, weird Russian art, and so it feels like, I don't want to say a very arty game, but yeah, like the way scenes look. The dog thing definitely was so weird, with it's this long, grisly thing, and I'm just like, why are we still here? You know that puzzle where you have to move the big parts of the city? Like it makes sense. It made sense to me when I was playing, but then suddenly I have this moment where I'm like, what the fuck has happened? Like, why is everything so big? Like, what's going on? And it's so, like, subtle with that kind of thing, where suddenly the perspective is, like, bonkers, and you're like, well, how did I get here?
The art direction is, like, so genius in this game, because, like, Riley, I know you talked about this a bit in your review, and it was something that took me, I think, the entire game to realize, is the world is slowly becoming more like fairy tale like when you start, you're basically just in like a church, and it's like, oh, this makes sense, I've seen a church before. And by the end, it's like, I'm in a different dimension. And I love that, like, there's never a moment where the game breaks. Like, it's so subtle in introducing this fantasy world to you.
You know, my first moment, and probably a lot of people's kind of moment of like, oh wait, what's going on, is when you get to that fish conveyor belt, and the fish are like, you know, 15 feet high, and then eventually they're like 400 feet high. But like, paying attention on my second playthrough, it starts happening earlier than that. And even those kind of like the like mill that you're going through and whatever, if you like really stop and look at it, it is this really, I think, knowing that the designer is was an architect or has architectural training or whatever, is like a really kind of important thing to know, because it manages to pull off feeling very legitimate while also being completely surreal. Like, it doesn't feel like a fake building. It just feels like a real building that is built in a kind of impossible or absurd way, which is a really kind of cool line to walk.
Also, this game joins the hallowed halls of what remains of Edith Finch of the best level you can put in a game is in a fish cannery where you chop a limb off a body.
Yeah. It's weird that it happened twice.
So that happens so there a cannery level in one of the Dishonors?
Oh, I don't know, because those games are real fishy.
There's definitely like there's a whale, like a whale refinery level for sure.
Yeah, there's a whale cannery in The Long Dark, my favorite survival game.
I never played that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, you should. It's the best. It's the best video game.
Now, I will say I am very positive on this game overall. I do think that my favorite part of it is the first hour. I think there are so many things that happen in like the very early stages that are so good. And one of those being so it's like you start out, you're Indika, you are this nun that everyone hates. And like everyone else at the convent. And we should also specify that it is not actually Catholicism, and Riley, maybe you can help me with this. She's in like a Russian Orthodox church, which my understanding is it's kind of just Catholicism minus like the Pope. Is that?
It's sort of. I'm not a super big expert in Russian Orthodoxy. I know that I don't know that there are any specific, because the game is kind of a fantasy thing, but I know that the developers are very much inspired by their disapproval of the Russian Orthodox Church, and especially its role in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which, as we've seen, the patriarch, whose name I can't pronounce, has just been sort of beating the drum for Putin, and is I think widely known to not be a great guy. So I think that's sort of what it's based on.
Yeah, so it's like I am kind of reading this in my ignorance as like basically Catholicism, but like it's not, it is not exactly, and that's just kind of what I associate with nuns. But she's a nun, she's in a convent. Everyone kind of hates her. She seems to be doing her best, but is experiencing these weird, she has a voice in her head that very much seems like the voice of the devil. She kind of sees visions, hallucinates things that then makes her like freak out and kind of disturb ceremonies going on. But my favorite part of the whole game is probably the thing with the water bucket.
Yeah.
Where you're just kind of, you're slowly wandering around, like trying to help all these nuns who are kind of casting you off. And one of the nuns is like, okay, go fill up my bucket with water. And so you pick up a bucket and you walk over to a well, and in a very, very intricate and time consuming animation, like attach the bucket to the well, lower it down, bring it back up, pour it into another bucket, walk over, pour it into the barrel next to the nun's door, and then it just says 1 out of 5. And like, the first time I played it, I was like, okay, when are they going to like interrupt this? And the answer is never. You just do all 5 of them, and like the willingness right off the bat to make the game like boring in this very intentional and weird way was just one of those, like, I feel like kind of signs from the game that was like, we are doing something. This game is like staking a claim that we're not just kind of using quote unquote good game design through the whole thing, because no one would ever ask you to do this incredibly boring and laborious process 5 times in a row. And then to have the bucket of water just knocked over, and it doesn't mean anything at all.
I feel like I took the wrong lesson from that part, because I really I worry a lot that I have these very like old school religious ideas. I really liked that part. I think I've done a lot of both actual work and work on like religious retreats. On Zen retreats, you often have to do a lot of chores, and at some point you kind of run out of chores, and like there's a place where I've gone on lots of retreats where I'm like, I have polished every chair in this retreat center like 15 times because you're just kind of out of things to do. And there's a way that's obviously easy to criticize, but I think there's also like a value in it. And so to me, I was like, oh boy, a tedious religion-based task. I would play a whole game that was just this. And then I think that it's obviously supposed to meant you be like, well, I don't know about this nunnery, but I thought it was really lovely.
No, and I love that there is a possible different interpretation of it being, you know, like, and maybe if Indica was kind of more actually in touch with her spirituality, because she, as we kind of find out through the game, is like really trying to figure out what this whole thing means. Like, maybe if she felt more, you know, comfortable with the place and was like actually feeling the lesson she was supposed to, she would be more capable of viewing it as this kind of Zen task. But it certainly feels like she and like the devil whispering in her ear is like, this is bullshit. You know, they're just having you
totally
do this.
Is bullshit too. Yeah.
There's a well literally right next to the bucket that you're not allowed to get water from.
I think I was siding with Indica on this. This is something I've often thought about with religion. Maybe it's because I went to Catholic school as an outsider and I didn't participate in the sacraments, so I just like watched them happen. But there is like a lot of, like, to me at least, repetition and tedium to religion. Like, you think about like going to reconciliation, you have to like say the Our Father 30 times and count the rosary and all this stuff. And I've often thought like religion made more sense to me when you're just stoked on the fact you're alive, rather than like having to prove through chores that you love God, you know? Like, I don't want to speak too out of turn, but like that's often how I've kind of read that. And like, I like the way that seemed to be verbalized in this game, where Indica didn't understand how going to get water for this mean old lady is going to get her closer to God. And I like the way that's represented mechanically in this game.
I think it looks at lots of different forms of religion and things that religion can mean. I feel like I always want to caveat that my sort of general, like, yeah, religion is good, is definitely like predicated on the fact that, like, despite being queer and trans, like, religion has never hurt me. I've been able to, because I live in America, I'm able to sort of leave religions that might cause harm to me because I'm an adult. And so I always want to be really careful that I don't sound like I'm cheerleading something that has caused like great legitimate harm to people that they are very much right to dislike. And so, like, yeah, I've never been punished by religion chores the way that I think other people very much have. You know?
And I think this game kind of, it either is an interesting exploration of both, or maybe muddles a little bit that difference between institutions and personal faith, where like a lot of it feels very much like a criticism of this specific Russian Orthodox Church and its kind of habits and proclivities and whatever, and then other parts of it are like, what's up with this whole God thing? What does hell mean?
Yeah.
And like those two things are a little intermixed. I did want to bring up this thing that the water thing reminded me of. There's a book called Devil in the Details by Jennifer Traig that's about growing up Jewish and also having undiagnosed OCD and finding like the kind of the rituals that you can kind of attach to like any religion of like hand washing or whatever, being like, oh, I'm just doing this because I'm like really devout, and then like later in life being like, no, there is this obsession that I'm attaching to this is kind of coming from somewhere else. And obviously we'll talk more about this with Hellblade, which is more specifically a game about like mental illness, but there definitely is, I think, this question in this of like how much of like Indica's problems are religion specifically, and how much is kind of like past trauma, mental illness, whatever, manifesting through kind of the only lens that she has, which is religion. You know, like it's, and I like that those things are really mixed up, because like she doesn't have the capability of like separating what's coming from where.
As a side note, what the fuck's up with the music and the 16-bit shit in this game? Like I kept trying to think there was a smarter read on both of them, and I ended up settling on, it's just kind of cool, isn't it? Just kind of cool stuff. Like, did you? Do y'all have anything?
I wasn't a huge fan of those sections. I don't know if y'all have. I was going to mention another game that I've been playing that also does that kind of thing, but maybe it's spoilers, so I won't. But I'm just kind of never a fan of these retro-y. I found the controls in those sections really annoying. Yeah. And it might just be that I don't have a lot of like
the rhythm game
nostalgia.
The like rhythm game you have to
play
like
Frog
is so annoying.
Yeah, where it's just a little clunky, or the one where you're getting the coins. Like those sections just kind of really cheesed me off. And I get that, like, I don't know why those kinds of sections in games always seem to focus on like the controls, and to me the controls are bad. And I just find that very irritating. But I get what they're going for, and I get why other people probably like them. But I just don't have a lot of like. It's like whatever from my childhood.
I think I agree. I do think the music throughout the game doesn't fit with the game, but I ended up like very positive on that like weird kind of dissonant electronic stuff, which I think sits equally weird as like we're going to do a 16-bit level halfway through this game.
But I think the game wants to be destabilizing.
Yeah.
Bring in all of these different, influences.
Yeah, I think the 16-bit, like the easy read is just like, okay, it's flashbacks, it's 16-bit. I also think that you could certainly kind of write something about the simpler graphics being kind of like remembering a more simple time in her life, that like the world not being as kind of like the realism of the graphics in this game, it often seems like it's kind of used as a weapon. Like it's rarely kind of beautiful. A lot of the time it is like really gross, or you're seeing these almost grotesque close-ups of like the characters' faces in these fisheye lens that are kind of like distorting their features and stuff. And so like the 16-bit is like, oh, remember when like my life was like cute and normal, which is of course completely subverted at the end, in which a 16-bit shotgun cuts a man in half in this like incredibly graphic looking, piece of retro graphics. In general, I think the other kind of big gamey thing that we haven't talked about yet is this idea of XP in the game, which is represented as these incredibly artificial looking like big point like glowing diamonds that are like much lower resolution than the rest of the world, and you're kind of picking them up, and every time you pause you see a level up screen, even though it's not clear what leveling up does necessarily. And so I think the music is kind of in line with that, where it's like visually everything is like, this is real, this is realistic, this is kind of surreal, and then all the accompanying stuff is like, this is a game, you know how video games work. And like, yeah, I think the like conflict between those is interesting. I love the music from the get-go, like having that completely bizarre shootout scene where these two men are standing like feet apart and kind of firing at each other and not hitting each other, and just having these like bleeps and bloops happening in the background really just adds to like how detached from reality the whole thing feels.
Yeah, that scene is so good.
So Indika gets kind of, in a way, it feels like she's being like kicked out of the convent, but really she is given a task, which is to like deliver this letter, and they kind of kick her out, and she's in the real world for the first time, and you're kind of running around the snow, and then I guess basically the first thing that happens is you get to this village, and like there is one of multiple kind of scenes of implied sexual assault in this game, which is another way where it's kind of like not a lot of games putting this fine a point on it. Blake, how'd you feel about this section? I
don't know. Rough.
I'm sorry, that was a cruel way of setting it up, but
I mean, like it's a introduction to the world that it feels like a left turn, not necessarily in a bad way, but it's like, oh, okay, like this is kind of where this game is willing to go in terms of what it wants to talk about, that like you don't get from the beginning of the game, which is, even though it's distressing for the main character, like when you're in the convent, a lot of stuff is goofy and kind of funny, and you're laughing at the little man popping out of the mouth and the weird camera angles. But like once you hit this scene, you're kind of like, okay, there's the game's going to be a little rougher. Like, there's going to be a darker tone to this that we're going to have to, like, be okay exploring. And I don't know that it's necessarily my place to say whether or not that scene is, like, good or not, but it is definitely, like, the moment I was like, okay, like, I got to kind of recalibrate my brain a bit.
One of the things that I did like in it, and I like that this game does generally, is it seems easy to make Indica either just kind of, like, neutral and being tormented by her traumas, or kind of, like, good and resisting, you know, like, the bad things. And in this scene, she sees, you know, glimpses of what appears to be a woman being sexually assaulted, and kind of, like, can't bring herself to intervene and hide. And it's the first time in the game that we see a glimpse of, like, the devil physically, like, his, you know, hand reaches over her shoulder. But then she is ultimately saved by Ilya comes in and like, you know, kills the guy who was doing the sexual assault. And in the next scene, Indica's kind of muttering, like, there's a girl, I saved her too, you didn't see, I did a good job, there was a girl, I saved her. And it's like, it is, I think that, like, Indica's character is very interesting in that she is kind of passive, but also, like, constantly retelling herself, like, what has happened in the world to make it work for herself in this kind of, like, selfish, narcissistic way, where, like, as soon as that scene is over, she kind of reworks it so that she did save the woman being sexually assaulted.
I think that's, like, an integral part of Indica's character, and you see it in her religious beliefs or lack thereof, where she's, like, still trying to convince herself she believes that she's molding the world not to fit her beliefs, but to, like, justify what she thinks she believes in. Does that make sense? Like, I often felt Indica had kind of lost the plot on religion. It was, like, just didn't want to admit she was an atheist at this point, and yet she was constantly, like, moving goalposts to be like, well, I still believe, but, like, I'm still questioning. And I think this is an introduction to, it's like, she didn't do jack shit, but she has to, like, almost, like, attempt to change her brain chemistry to be like, well, I'm the hero of this and everything is okay and I don't have to feel bad about this anymore.
Yeah. This is also our introduction to Ilya, who, another thing that I didn't guess about this game is it was going to be like a two-hander for basically the whole time.
No. His arm's broken.
Excuse me. Yeah, a 3 out of 4-hander. Yeah, so Ilya has escaped from early on, one of the just kind of, like, things that you run across, and there are so many things in this game where the world just seems kind of like it's just breaking down, but Indica doesn't really question it, and so you as the player are like, I guess it's okay, is there's just, like, a train sinking into the river, and like a general who's, like, impaled on the train car, and you get the sense that there was a train crash, and I guess Ilya was on the train, or he otherwise just, like, escaped from prison, but he is shooting at the soldiers, they're shooting at him, and ultimately him and Indica get on this ridiculous looking, like, motorized penny farthing bicycle and bike away. Riley, I guess this is a larger question about Ilya, but he is kind of a foil to Indica in a lot of, you know, like, as you wrote in your review, you'd expect the nun to be devout and the prisoner to be not, but in fact it is kind of switched. Did you enjoy his character? Did you think he was a good addition?
I thought that sort of reversal, as it were, was really interesting. It was a really interesting choice. I thought he was really interesting. And I think that the game does a good job of kind of not picking sides. It doesn't make fun of him. He's, like, very devout, and God talks to him, and he's gonna, you know, he's on this quest, and I think the game is just like, yep. And I thought that was really interesting. I think I personally am definitely more on, you know, his camp than Indica's if I had to pick a side. Yeah, and I love that scene with the bike, and it's interesting because you learn, I guess, in the backstory, and I think in that scene too, that Indica is like a bike mechanic and stuff, and it's like such a
Yeah.
weird detail that doesn't make any sense. And also, I think the weird bike is like, we're not really in the past, we're in some kind of weird fantasy, steampunky jazz past.
I'm so dumb. I was like, I didn't know
so-
that kind of bike existed. Until much later in the game, I was like, oh, it probably did not.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that those things just happen, and they're like, "Yup," and you're like, "Okay." I thought that scene riding the bike and like riding the bike through the snow while they're talking about God, bikes and snow and religion being like three of my favorite things. I was like, well, I would just play this game forever. Like, this is great. But yeah, I think he's really interesting and very cool. And,
Yeah, so his character motivation is basically he has some kind of really fucked up arm.
Jacob, how strange is it that we've played 2 games on Something Rotten where a character has compartment syndrome and has to get their arm amputated?
What's the other game?
The Last of Us Part 2.
Oh yeah.
And in Hellblade 1, she has like the kind of rot that's like creeping up her arm. And so basically Indica sees the arm and is immediately like, we need to take that off, dude. Like, this is not looking good. And she says, like, you're gonna die in like a day if we don't. And Ilya says, here's the thing, a doctor told me that last week and I'm still alive. And so that to me tells me that like God is working through me. I'm talking to God, and it's okay to not amputate this arm, which is I think it presents,
which he wants to keep because he plays guitar, right? There's like
there's
a reason why he doesn't want to lose his arm.
Yes,
not just. I mean, people generally don't wish to lose their arms, but in his case, it's
right. But for him, it's particularly important.
Yeah.
It very much conjures, like the conflict here is kind of like there's that joke about the guy on the roof of his house during a flood, and like guy comes with a boat and he says, no thanks, God will save me. And another guy comes with a helicopter and he says, no thanks, God will save me. And then he drowns and he says, God, why didn't you save me? And God says, I did. I sent you a boat and a helicopter. And so it's like, from Indica's side, you could see the argument of like, what do you mean God's going to figure it out? Like, I'm here. I am nominally an agent of God. Like, I do medicine. This is what I should be doing. And him then being like, no, this is, like, I feel like I know how this is supposed to go, and it's not that we just do modern medicine on it. And we also find out that Ilya's going to see the cadets. Is this a real thing? I know that there are like...
I don't think so. I tried to look it up, and I couldn't find it as a word, which, given the state of Google, could mean nothing. But I don't
right.
believe
Yeah,
so.
you search it, and the first thing is like the cadets Indica guide.
Yeah,
so
it's like, yeah.
the SEO is taken, but it is some very holy religious artifact that he's like, when I see this, if I can like kiss it, my connection to God will be enough that like a miracle will occur.
Which is like neat. I don't know. I like that. I don't know if you all have been following. There's this young. It's been in gaming circles because the kid played video games, but there's going to be this millennial Catholic saint. They just verified his second miracle, and he played PlayStation. I'm really offended by this because like they haven't sainted Dorothy Day, but like this kid, like whatever. But I'm not a Catholic. It's none of my business. But this, why did I say that?
What was his miracle?
Somebody interacted with something and then they were healed of something.
He was like a gamer. It's like a 360 no scope was really sick.
Yeah, but only like 1 hour a day or something. The rules to become a saint are like very specific, and again, that hasn't happened to Dorothy Day, founder of the Catholic Workers, who like did many good important things, but it will happen to some kid. It's like bugs me, but whatever, man.
I was trying to explain to my partner Annie the cultural impact of the video game Undertale, and I said the Pope has been exposed to Undertale not once but multiple times. So that's we're gonna get a gamer Pope.
It makes Undertale at least as important as the band U2, who I believe has also performed for the Pope in recent years.
I've really been rooting for this Pope. The Pope,
he's cool.
Kind of stepped in it this week. Yeah, he said a gay slur this week.
Oh yeah, Blake, did you see
Oh,
that?
never mind.
So that's like a bit of a...
He said like an Italian or a Latin version of it. It was a real like, oh my god, I didn't even know there would be a word for that in another language.
When I said the Pope was
Yes.
cool, it was a verbal typo. I meant the Pope is not cool. That was what I meant to say.
I mean, it's tough because, like, he's done... If you look at him as the Pope in the Catholic Church, I think he's done some, like, good things. And I think sometimes when I see people be upset with him about gay stuff or trans stuff, I want to be like, he's the fucking Pope, man. Like, what did you think the Pope... Like, I get that he's, like, better, but, like, he's still the Pope. And, you know, he's not Ratzinger, who... When I was in divinity school, Ratzinger sent, like... people to the Jesuit seminaries to like look for gay people. It was this whole thing. So like he's not that, but it's he probably shouldn't be saying like slurs. That's not
great.
Super
Not great.
So,
Riley,
like,
have you ever read the author Patricia Lockwood, who wrote Priest Daddy most notably, but also has like a number of blogs?
Oh yeah, I read did she write No One's Talking About This?
Yes.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, so I like that book. I love Priest Daddy, which is her story about having a Catholic priest as a father because he was a Lutheran or something, and then converted to Catholicism after he had a family, and so they were like, you can do this. But she recently, last year, had a blog about like she was invited to meet the Pope along with a bunch of other artists in this weird Vatican attempt to be like, hey, can the Catholic Church, like, can they, like, vibe with artists again? One of the artists invited was Andre Serrano, who's the Piss Christ guy.
Yeah.
Who apparently, there was that story about the Pope, like, faux scowling at him and then giving him a thumbs up, which is very funny. Cool. But there's, Lockwood has this line in that blog where she writes about, like, everyone bringing the Pope things, like bringing him gifts, and she writes that it hadn't even occurred to her. She's like, he has 4 things and one of them is God. What could you possibly bring him?
What would you give him? Yeah, he's doing fine.
Have I this is a weird full circle here. Have I ever told my Andre Serrano story on this show?
I don't think so.
Believe it or not, folks at home and folks on the pod, I was not a great student, much less in my collegiate career where I didn't even finish school. But the like one and only A I ever got on anything in college was a like persuasive argument or whatever we had to do in I think it was an English course. And my argument was Piss Christ was a better representation of art than the Pope's Sistine Chapel. So there we go. It all came full circle. I was a maverick 10 years ago.
Definitely.
There we go.
The Pope actually published that article. It got him to change his mind.
I remember that another girl's presentation in that class was how Beyonce was a agent of the devil, and that the music industry was like all full of like QAnon Satan worshipping people. It was great. The Jefferson Community and Technical College in Louisville, Kentucky was a trip, let me tell you.
I mean, and now that's just like 40% of everyone. Thinks
As
that.
I recall, she did not get an A on her presentation, but I did.
It's the other night I watched that Alex Jones documentary on HBO.
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
Was really interesting. But these things that these people believe that are like kind of wild, but I again, because I'm sort of fascinated by how people believe weird things. There's a guy who had propagated the idea that Sandy Hook, the shooting, didn't really happen, and he's like, "What's going to be real bad if I'm wrong?" Like, it seems like Alex Jones, or whatever he believes, doesn't matter terribly, I think, but like, it seems like this guy like really believes it, and I'm just like there's part of me that can get it, where I'm like, yes, this was a horrible thing that happened, and if the only way your brain can make sense of it is to imagine it's fake, there's like a tiny part of me that's like, oh gosh, I feel that. But then also, now you're a monster, and like, there's no excuse for being a horrible monster who's ruining people's lives. But like, yeah, it's so, and yeah, the way that these beliefs are spreading, it's like,
yeah, it's like it in a way, it's much easier to deal with the like, well, obviously you're just corrupt and you're using whatever other people believe as like a way to get rich, than like you actually believe. I mean, there's people have said there's that video that was famous from like 10 years ago about the woman looking at the can of Monster and like finding all the like numerology reasons why it was like the devil, and it's like, now that feels like it's almost mainstream.
Now that's half the Republican Party. It's just that argument.
And it's like how
true, though.
how do you deal with these people like sincerely believing that like children are being trafficked into like a satanic cult, not like believing it because they think it's a route to power, but it's like they are so, if you believed that hundreds of thousands of children were being trafficked, you would also be upset about it. And so it's like it's hard to just be like they're crazy because like, well, they're wrong, but the thing that
then
they
you have
believe
Jeffrey
is so
Epstein.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
well, I don't know.
Do you remember the halcyon days of Pizzagate when we were like, oh, that's a weird thing happening in a very small corner of the world that Reply All did an episode on, and now it's just like, that's what probably most people's grandparents believe across the nation. Like, what is happening?
I think it's, attempts to like make meaning, which is something that I find compelling about religion, and like sometimes those attempts go very wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm just sort of generally interested in what that's like for people.
I mean, not to stretch too far, but I feel like this is part of what Indika is wrestling with, is finding meaning in her own life. And I love those conversations she has with Ilya about like the nature of God and whether or not you can ever love God genuinely, or if you're just scared of being punished.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Indica's big thing, that it's like we land on after there's some, there's a bloodborne dog in this game that chases them around.
I love that but nobody, when you see the dog for the first time, Indica's like, oh, it's just a dog, and it's like, is this what dogs look like where you live? Like, it's a monster.
It looks like the dog from Sandlot. Remember when you first see the dog in the movie? It's like 20 feet long.
Like, it's very weird, and it's weird how she responds to it.
Yeah, so the dog enters mostly, it seems, as an excuse to have a chase sequence, have the craziest camera shot in a game where the camera is attached to this wheel that is going around and the dog's head is stuck through the wheel, and we're watching it get like dunked underwater and its body like ragdolling around. It genuinely just like the power of the moving image.
That scene was in the demo, and I remember I didn't love that chase sequence, which I think at the game I just found that a little clunky, and so I just found it like obnoxious to navigate. But I'm also sort of bad at anytime the game puts time pressure on me, I'm like, I've never used my hands before, I can't do this. But how long that scene goes on, I think I found like kind of quite disturbing, and
it is there are several instances of this game having basically like ideas more ambitious than the level of polish that they're able to give them, where it's like, I'm like, thinking about this chase scene, I think it's really interesting. Playing the chase scene, kind of just trial and error, you don't really know where you're supposed to go, but like it's so short that it doesn't rub too much. But what I was going to say is it seems like the dog is mostly kind of an excuse for them to then start talking about like the nature of souls, of like, does a dog have a soul? And if it doesn't have a soul, does it love its master? And Indica kind of has this whole rambly monologue about like what it means to have a soul or not. And Ilya's like, for a dog. And she's like, yeah, for a dog. But, it really seems like she is consumed by this idea of like, if everything she has been taught about religion is true, then one, why would God give people free will? And two, does free will actually exist? Because as she kind of says in this like extended metaphor, she's like, okay, well, if the Tsar wants you to marry him, and he says if you don't marry him, I'm going to give you to this butcher who will murder you, are you really free to have a choice of marrying him or not? If your choice is eternal paradise or eternal damnation, what kind of choice is that? Which is not a new argument by any means, but I do think that it is compellingly spelled out here, and you do get the sense that it's... I think what's really interesting about it is Indika has clearly been thinking about this for years, but then she's never been outside the monastery. She's never been able to like talk to anyone about it.
Yeah, and it's like personal to her and her life experience as we learn.
I mean, I remember very pivotally in a young man's life, like growing up in a religious school, the moment you're like, wait, you're telling me God knows everything that will happen, and yet I have free will. How does that work? And it's like, it's kind of just a more eloquent way of like that conversation I had with my religion teacher in 5th grade. But it's like, it's an interesting question because it feels like through that lens, you're just like, some people are fucked, like, and they had no hope of ever not being fucked by it. And I think it's like something as a child that gave me so much anxiety, and I see it in Indica is like, well, what if I'm just one of the ones who, like, if God knows everything, my free will is just rocketing me towards hell, which is like terrible. It's an awful way to like think about God and this like supposed gift of free will we've been given, and yet it's like how we structure that entire system.
Yeah, they get a lot of mileage out of these sorts of ideas in conversations that have, like, you've probably heard elsewhere. Late in the game, there's this whole discussion of I can't remember his name, but like a scythe man, who basically has the whole like, hey, if a child dies and they haven't committed sin, they just immediately go to heaven. So like, why shouldn't I start murdering children? Especially if I already know I'm going to hell, then I can just like grant a bunch of kids admission to the kingdom of heaven. And like, isn't that better than being on earth? And I think what's interesting about that scene is that the guy who's telling it is like, yeah, I don't know, I guess he was kind of a hero. I mean, he killed 7 kids, but like, like they don't really have an answer for why he is incorrect, which like, it doesn't mean that religion doesn't have an answer for that, but I do think it speaks to more like the common man's experience with religion is like maybe encountering a lot of these questions and just choosing to like not think about them because you have to get like really deep, you have to go to divinity school or something in order to like read the actual conversations that like religious thinkers have had about these sorts of issues.
Yeah, it's cool, I think, to me to see a game where they just walk around talking about that stuff and it's not a metaphor or something. Like, it's cool. I think it's a really bold choice of a game to just be like, mostly this game is 2 people walking around talking about religion. And I think those conversations are interesting, and I think the things that happen with like Indika and the narrator, like I think I wrote in my review that like, the devil's arguments I think are sometimes a little simplistic, but it's also interesting to like that a game is just gonna go for them,
Yeah, and it is, it does a lot of the kind of pro religion is a sham arguments in this game do feel a little like when you first discover atheism. Like, yeah. These are the kind of ideas that you're going to encounter. But, like, to be fair, that is literally what's happening to Indika. It's like she is not, like, a scholar. She's, like, 20 years old and is outside a convent for the first time in her life.
To the game's credit, though, like, I'm not an atheist, and I still feel like I got a lot out of those conversations. Like, I don't think it's, like, as simple. And Jacob, I don't think you're implying this, but, like, I think there is, like, things to get out of the questions in this game, even if you are not, like, perhaps in line with the developer's ostensible belief system. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely hear what you're saying, but I feel like as someone who has a belief system, I still feel like I got a lot out of those questions, which I feel like are fair and valid, and my own questions about like my own beliefs and whether or not a god is real. Yeah.
Okay, so there are a couple puzzly sections afterwards. There's a lot of great, like, driving a big machine around puzzles, which, like, the puzzles themselves are not, they're not geniusly designed, but I think they're made up for by just, like, very weird environments and kind of, like, the feeling of them. There's this thing where you're driving through a cargo yard and you're just like picking up and dropping a big shipping container and it's like smashing into things. And it's, it's very fun. And ultimately you go through this fish processing plant, which is so mysterious in how it works. Remember that time when they're in a tunnel and then the tunnel seems to like go underwater? And it's just like, what is going on here?
I thought the game was bugged for like a solid minute. I was like, fuck, man, am I going to have to reload? Like, where was the save?
Yeah, that factory is set and the cans kind of get bigger and
Yeah.
it's so weird. But nobody mentions it. This is just the size that cans are in the world,
Right.
I guess. Which is bizarre.
But there is a kind of, there's a platforming section of sorts where you have to like dodge between big fish, and then eventually, no matter what you do get knocked down by the fish into the water. And then there is a scene where, again, this is like, I think one of the highest compliments that I can give this game is like, it does really feel like a game made for grown-ups, and not mature in the way that we often define games, which is like it's super gory, but just like it is a game made for adults. And part of that is the scene where like they're both soaking wet in this presumably freezing water, and Ilya kind of finds a furnace room, and he's like, look, if you don't get out of these freezing clothes, you're going to die. And then like both he and Indika get naked, and the nudity is not like, it is not completely ignored, but also it's not played in like a kind of exploitative feeling way. And it is just this kind of like, it is a scene full of implications. Like, Ilya starts smoking in the middle of it, and it's like, that certainly feels like something. And obviously there is just this tension of like, Indika being a nun and being naked around a man for the first time, at least since she joined the convent. But I just really love this scene. I think it is like so kind of artfully done. I think we've talked a lot about the cinematography, but like the way that this scene uses kind of close-ups and shadows and whatever, I just find really compelling. Blake, are you with me?
I totally agree, and I think the one part of this scene you're leaving out, it was my favorite, is when Ilya catches Indika trying to peek at him as he's trying to peek at her. I thought that was a smart touch. Something never commented on again by the game. I just like that they allow Indika a moment to be a little horny. Like, I think there's like a lot of smart ways this game over time humanizes Indika, and I think that's like really one of them, where it's like, yeah, like she's a hormonal girl, and like she's taking the moment, and I like it.
I feel like we kind of skipped over I think in the factory, maybe it happens, and maybe it happens another time, the puzzles with like the praying.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
which I had kind of. It's weird because it seems like such a mechanic, but then it doesn't happen terribly.
It only happens
often,
like twice.
Yeah, there's a couple moments where you are praying, and if you press, I don't know, right mouse or whatever button I press to pray, the landscape like changes and you can kind of navigate in it. But it had such interesting vibes. But,
yeah, importantly, while you're not praying, it's like it feels like hell is leaking into the world. It's like the devil is muttering in your ear, and like red light is spilling everywhere.
Yeah.
And so they're navigational puzzles, but yeah, the set dressing is what makes them interesting.
Yeah, I think it's cool that the puzzles aren't too like complicated. Like I didn't see that as a flaw. I think it gives you something to. I mean, it's easy to critique like walking simulators, but like it kind of gives you something to like do with your brain while you're doing the main thrust of the game. So I really liked the puzzles generally.
Did you ever press the pray button when you weren't in one of those sections?
I must have.
Indika does the sign of the cross.
Yeah. Like, right, there's the little collectibles with the points.
Yeah.
And, like, I actually really like those. I feel like the game was trying to say, because as you said, like, the points and the leveling up is all meaningless, that it was just some kind of meaningless ritual. But I, like, being
I did them all, yeah.
But you're taking this moment out of your day to check out this, like, artifact. And so I really liked that, but I'm kind of old school.
I did the sign of the cross everywhere. I just walk into a new area and be like, pray up.
Yeah, I think it's nice.
I like it's like Transistor has the button where you can press it and you start humming along to the song, and Indika has you press it and you just do the sign of the cross.
Yeah. I love that kind of thing.
Yeah, this naked scene ends because they're kind of looking at each other, and it almost feels like a scene where they're like about to kiss, and then Indika says the smell from Ilya's arm is unbearable, which is both one, a mean thing to say, two, maybe her like her just like feeling awkward and trying to get out of it. But also it feels like if Ilya's arm is like kind of his way of interfacing with God, it is like another way in which Indika is kind of like, I need to get away from this thing because like I know that your fucked up arm to you is like the reason that you're talking to God, or like the way that God is talking through you or whatever. And she is just kind of like freaked out by it and ultimately chops it off.
Yeah, which, I mean, good job that she did it, I guess.
What about, here's a scene that I don't quite know what to make of, is before you leave the cannery, there's the scene where like Ilya's like, I gotta go get something, and you go and he kind of finds his secret brick, and he has like finger puppets, and there's like two frogs and a guitar, and they're kind of sitting together, and Indika sings like a lullaby, and they both seem to be enjoying it, and then Ilya eventually like faints, and that's when she decides she has to chop off his arm. But like is it, am I overthinking it? Is it just kind of like a nice moment between them? Or it just struck me as like very specific and kind of interesting, but I wasn't quite sure what was going on other than giving them a nice moment together.
I think it's like the climax of their relationship, because after this, like, their relationship kind of sours out, right? And it's like, it's at least the like explicit moment of kind of like romantic bonding between the two that I think like you have to have before that bond is like broken and Ilya feels betrayed by her. Yeah,
and I think I think you're right, because there is this very kind of devastating line that Ilya says to Indika after the arm chop, where he's like, God hasn't talked to me since I've been with you, which is I think probably for Indika another confirmation that like she is just somehow damned, that like not only can she not connect with God, but like her presence is impeding God's connection with people around her in this way that you could imagine would be personally devastating. So immediately after the arm chop is this other flashback scene with the sequence where you have to jump over a bunch of frogs, which is annoying, but it also has a pretty jammin' song.
Yeah.
This time I was playing through it, I was into the frogs.
You sure get to know that fucking song well, because you gotta like get your internal metronome really synced up with that song.
Yeah, dude, that part was so
hard.
Yeah,
you have to like jump like half a beat before the actual frog comes up, so you have to like be able to figure out the swing of this fucking song. It's so annoying.
It turns into Celeste for a second.
Dude, it's crazy. This level really took me a while. I felt like an idiot trying to get across this. You have to memorize where the frogs are going.
I don't. Yeah, and there's another one of those levels with the windows or whatever that I remember finding really hard, where it didn't always make sense to me, and like again, I'm put off by those kinds of things, but I get that other people might not be.
I feel like it should be the kind of thing where they have it in, and then if you like fail 6 times, they just like teleport you to the top.
Yeah,
because it's like I kind of enjoyed it, but also it's like it's not like I got more out of the game because I was like good at hopping over the frogs.
That happened to me with the first one where you race the bike. I just like couldn't steer it right, and I just kept losing, and I remember it was like so, and when I realized that it wouldn't let you couldn't actually lose, I was just like, oh, come on, like but I think the game, I wish I could skip it, but I respect that the game is like, it's gonna make you do its thing, which I respect as a design choice, even though it made me personally very unhappy.
We also get confirmation, I'm not sure if it's in this flashback or it might be the next one, but like we do see that Indika has had sex, which is another kind of like, she alludes when she's talking to Ilya a lot. She's like, oh, if you only knew the things that I had done. And like clearly that is one of the things that she like views herself as like the worst thing is probably telling her dad that she didn't know the guy she was going to run away with, and then her dad brutally murders him. And it's like, I understand feeling like that's something that you could feel guilty about irrespective of religion, but like it also probably seems like a lot of the self-hatred is because she has had sex in the past and like feels bad about it. When we come back, Ilya is smoking, which is both, or not Ilya, Indika is smoking, which is a great image of just the smoking nun. And also it is this weird kind of like, has she decided since she's chopped his arm off, then like kind of there's no point in being good anymore, or did she just want to smoke, or is it somehow, I mean, it's like, whenever I see a character smoking like that, I do kind of think of like the after sex implication, but I'm like, I don't know what to make of that in context of his arm being chopped off. So
you know that picture of, I don't think it's a real nun, but it's a lady dressed in a nun outfit at a baseball game, drinking a beer and smoking a cigarette. Indica was very that picture coded in this moment.
That's on their vision board. Yeah. I wanted as good a time as any to bring it up. So I played this game twice because I played it when it came out, and then when we decided we were going to do it for this season. The second time I chose to play in Russian just because I was like, oh, this will be interesting. It'll be kind of different. And it is. I mean, like, I think the English voice acting is really good. I don't think there's a reason to prefer the sub over the dub. But, like, I think I did feel more the sense of like being in a different place when I was playing it in Russian. And so, you know, if you're playing this game multiple times, it's kind of a fun way to run through it.
One thing I was pleasantly surprised by with this game was how good the acting was across the board.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily expect it to have bad acting, but you know, with a game of this scale, it can be very hit and miss. And I was like very impressed with basically, I mean, especially the Devil and Indica. I feel like both of those performers, I don't know the names unfortunately, but they are just like really bringing a lot. The Devil is just like, he's almost like very Shakespearean. A lot of like, it's very very verbose and like,
it's very good.
And and the way like the Indica's performer navigates all her various emotions, like very, very impressed. Which I think it helps that the writing, I think it's very, very strong across the board, but hell yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking on the IMDb to see if I know anyone, and it doesn't really seem like the English actress for Indica was in that As Dusk Falls game. But that's kind of the only thing that I recognize, and maybe that game was good. I didn't play it.
I never even heard of it.
It's the one, you would recognize it if you saw it. I feel like it has a really ugly art style. There is so after the chop, Ilya kind of leaves you. There's a part that felt very deliberate to me, but it went unremarked upon in the game, which I thought was kind of interesting, where you go up this elevator and there are almost two doors like the Stanley Parable. Yep. It's just kind of like go through one of these two doors and they both go to the same place and no one says anything about it. But when I was playing it, I was like, this is a thing. This is a choice. Maybe, you know, if we are just going to read it as kind of like, no matter what you do, you're going to the same place, maybe a little simplistic of it. But the fact that no one was like, two doors, what does this mean? Made me like the little visual metaphor.
Yeah. How'd you feel about the puzzle?
Which puzzle?
The elevator puzzle. It's a real thinker where you have to put the elevator halfway between the platforms.
I basically like trial and errored my way through it. Like when I got the answer, I didn't even do it on purpose. I was just kind of like, oh, I guess I can get through now.
And that a little. Is that the one too with where you're moving the crates around and it? Is that later?
Oh well, yeah. There's that other one. Yeah, I guess they're kind of two elevator puzzles because there's that one where you're just climbing the big tower.
Yeah.
And you go up and up. And that one was also just kind of like a pathfinding challenge. That one I didn't really get anything out of. I don't know what like the metaphorical meaning of it was. But finally you get to get to a city, which is another kind of cool like environmental thing where it's like, oh, I didn't think this game was just gonna put me in like a full ass, you know, like inhabited city.
You know, one of my favorite little architectural quirks, and you know, because I live in Astoria, we actually kind of have this because there's a massive train, like elevated train track that goes through the northern end of Astoria that like houses and stores are built under. In fact, the subway station is built under a different train track. So when you get out at the Astoria Ditmar station, you're under a bridge, which is really crazy.
Right.
Anyway, I love that shit. I think it's just a cool design. And I loved being here. And these impossibly large bridges and like aqueducts is what this city is built under, and you're kind of like navigating the second level of them, looking down at all the buildings like overshadowed by these huge structures. I think it's such a cool design choice.
There's a part in that, I don't know if any of you went into this, where there's this big monster behind like a gate.
Yeah.
It looks like, and I remember seeing it because I of course was like, oh god, this thing is gonna chase us, because like a dog chases us before, and it like doesn't. And it's just there, and I'm like, what?
I didn't see it at the gate. I saw a monster in the puzzle where the rooms are it's the same room, but it has different orientation.
That's you. That's like when you see Shell through the portal.
Which I didn't realize.
You're seeing you in the other room.
Oh,
that thing got me so stressed out, because I thought, oh god, because I had not enjoyed the dog. I saw that in that puzzle. I was like, oh god, a monster! Like it's gonna be another fucking chase thing. And I didn't realize. It took me forever to realize it was me. It super freaked me out. And then I think I had moved, and I was like,
I didn't realize it, but that makes sense, because the end of the game, you're staring in that fucking mirror forever, and it's the weirdo creature.
Yeah, and again, like it's so. It doesn't come up at all. It's never explained why you're doing that, why that's happening. No one ever talks about it again, which is so interesting. Yeah. And again, it's so subtle that suddenly you're like, it took me forever to realize what was happening, and again, like, why is it happening?
My favorite, I guess, two architectural details about the city. One is that bridge puzzle at the end where you're operating a crane, and at least I didn't really understand what I was about to do when it's just like, hey, lower the crane, pick up the train, and you like yank an enormous bridge out of the ground, and like everyone's like yelling at you, and you like break the scaffolding, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? And you're just like swinging this bridge around. But also that when you're walking through, there are these bells in the distance that are the size of like a city block. They're just like the biggest church bells in the world, and it's just it is this great imagery of, again, like the church hanging over everything you do, that like, you know, maybe this is just kind of like the way that Indica is seeing the world, is that these things are like so incredibly oversized.
Was I incorrect in hearing Ilya yelling back at the dudes? Like, it seemed like Ilya was trying to be like, I'm gonna come down there and fuck y'all up, when they're yelling at you.
I think so.
Which I thought was great.
This whole section, Ilya has put his severed arm in his backpack, and you're walking behind him, and you can just see the
moves.
Arm like bouncing.
Just so weird, yeah.
Another like really kind of batting above its budget thing that this game does is like the animation work is so good, and Ilya having all these like very specific animations for doing things one-handed, I was just consistently impressed by. And there's a scene at the end where he's holding his own arm above his head.
Dude,
and
it's such a funny touch.
It really looks good.
So good.
It's such a good gag. I also was really impressed with Ilya tuning the guitar one-handed. That's a very good animation for that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But I think Indica coming out with both her hands up and then Ilya holding his other got the biggest laugh of the game out of me. That was so funny.
That's very good.
There's another strange interlude that I don't know if either of y'all have a read on, where after you do that portal puzzle, you are just confronted with a man looking directly into the camera and whistling for like a long time.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I don't
this?
think it was a man. I think it was a nun.
Oh,
but yes, I did see.
I can't remember what song they're whistling an actual song, but now I'm blanking on what song it was.
Yeah, it just felt a very you know, I appreciate that sometimes it does feel like the game is just weird for the sake of weird, not in like a random way, but just being like, you're not gonna get all of this world. It's, you know, there's stuff going on here that's kind of beyond you.
It's definitely got like just a real strain of Eastern European weirdo to it. Like, if you've ever watched like Jolosky movies, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but you know, like the guy who did Possession or any of those weirdos. Like, it feels very informed by them, where it's like there is probably a much deeper meaning to this moment, and only makes sense to the person who made this moment. And you just kind of got to like ride with it. And I love that whistling moment, but I definitely was like, I'm just not going to overthink it. Like I'm not going to come to some epiphany about this whistle.
Yeah, it's coming from I think a specific artistic tradition. Which again is just going for it, which is cool. Yeah.
And the developer has talked about, or the director of the game has talked about, kind of wanting this to be kind of in the tradition of Russian literature, of which I have read none of. So I don't know. Again, it is. It probably there is probably a lot you could read.
Also,
into it.
Because I know people are right in. I know Zalewski is not Russian; he's Polish. But
so we finally get to the church. We actually, the goal of the whole game. I don't actually know if this was the place that Indika was supposed to deliver her letter.
I don't think so. It kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah. Do you ever get to read the letter? Because I know Indika and Ilya reads it, but I forgot to go in my inventory and check if I could read it.
I think I can't remember if she reads it out loud or
I don't
if
think
the
so.
devil just narrates what it says. At some point she opens it and we find out.
Because the devil says she's being defrocked.
Oh,
she is,
right. Okay.
They are like kicking her out.
Gotcha.
And so I'm not sure if she just decides that she's not gonna deliver it or whatever. But it doesn't end up coming up in the rest of the game, other than her just kind of living with the knowledge that like it almost doesn't matter what she does on this quest. They're kicking her ass out.
When Indika gets to the church and the priest is there, and they want to see the cadets, I really like the kind of bow this moment puts on Indika's whole religious journey, where she lies to the priest about Ilya, and he's like, hey, don't worry, like the priest is bound by confession. He's not gonna sell you out. And the priest immediately
no, she doesn't lie to him. She confesses.
Right, I
to
guess
him.
that's true. Sorry.
Yeah.
But like nevertheless, she's like, hey, the priest is bound by confession, he's not gonna sell you out, and he immediately sells her out. And I love that bow on like Indika's whole religious journey, that it's like the moment she is confronted by like a religious leader, he just completely fucks the whole thing up for her. I think it's maybe it's the final cynical view of religion in this game, but I think it is fitting into Indika's kind of hero's journey throughout this.
Yeah, and it's actually a kind of scene that I wanted more stuff like, because as has been well documented, the whole development team basically fled Russia and went to like Kazakhstan to finish this game. And have been very explicit about like the Russian Orthodox Church is supporting the war in Ukraine. We are getting out. We don't feel like we can kind of like speak freely there. All of that, but it doesn't feel like the game really specifically highlights the kind of harmful collaboration between church and state that much. And so I really like this, where it's like, the priest is just a tool of the cops, man. Like, you tell the priest and he immediately rats you out. And I would actually be, because of like the specificity of this development team's like story, I would kind of love more stuff like that. I think I might find that a little more compelling than like some of the discussions of like, does God let us have free will or whatever? But at the same time,
I kind of like that it doesn't. I think that the game highlights and critiques those things by they're just so interwoven. I think we see, like, to me, like when the priest rats her out, like I think we see sort of like soldiers and lower class kind of people respect. Well, we don't even. I was gonna say we see people kind of respecting her for being a nun, but we kind of really don't. And I think that sort of speaks to, I think to me as a regular person, if I see a nun, I'm like, wow, a nun. But like the sexism within the church in terms of that, and the ways that nuns are treated much less well than monks or priests or whatever, and so I think him ratting her out and it not being the game not being like, see, look, like I think it's just like, yes, of course, like that's just how things work, in a way that I thought was like interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think the game needed to be more on the nose with anything, and so if what I'm asking for would be more just like, war is bad and the church helps it, then like, I don't need that. Anyway, they so which happens? Does the priest get shot first, or do they go see the cadets first?
The priest gets shot first, and that gives them the opening to go to the cadets.
Yeah.
Right. So the priest goes. He tells the troops. They come in. They're holding them up at gunpoint. Through just kind of like a no one was trying to kill the priest, but the priest I think the priest tries to grab Ilya. Ilya grabs him back. The priest is yelling like, shoot him, and then Indika kind of pushes the priest, and he gets pushed in front of the gun, and the soldier shoots him, which is, again, it's like, if Indika hadn't hit her lowest before, assisting the murder of a priest is like probably pretty bad in her moral universe. But yeah, then they go in, and there is the scene with the cadets, which is just like visually kind of astounding, where like Ilya tells her to like hold his severed arm up to where it was severed, and then he's there and he's kind of crossing himself and kissing the cadets, hoping for God to attach his arm back to his body, which doesn't happen, and then they get pulled out by the soldiers. But I guess, Riley, is there a way of reading this scene not cynically? Like, what is, because this really seems like, at least from Indika's perspective, there would be the like, there is no God and he's not going to perform a miracle. Is there kind of like another way of taking this, or like from Ilya's side?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that the game, Ilya is sort of very devout, but he's not like, one note, and I think he's not stupid. Like, it's not clear to me the extent to which he like really thinks it will happen. And I think this kind of ties back maybe to what that joke you were talking about before about God sending a boat and stuff. Is like that I think it would be simplistic to be like, and God didn't reattach his arm, so God's not real. But I also think that there's something, to me, kind of beautiful in the idea, regardless of how real it is. The idea that God could, that such a thing could happen. I feel like I'm arguing something I don't believe. Like, I don't think it doesn't feel like a failure moment to me. It doesn't feel like a moment that's disrespectful of Ilya or his faith. And I think, to me, maybe if I'm being like pro-religion about it, I think to me maybe it speaks more to like complexity, right? What do you do? I feel like this is like a very personal story, I guess, that I tell a lot, but I remember like many years ago, something bad was going to happen to me. There was something going on in my life, and I was very worried about it, and I was praying, and I think I was praying like one does, like, God, I hope this thing doesn't happen, please help me, blah, blah, blah. And I was like walking somewhere, and I was doing this, and sort of over the course of it, I started thinking about like the other people involved, and like, well, but they kind of think they're doing the right thing, and like, what does it mean for them? And I remember that sort of through the course of this experience, my prayers kind of went from like, God, like, I hope this thing doesn't happen. I hope these people don't find me, to like, I hope that this works out the best for everyone. And maybe that means that like things I wish wouldn't happen to me happen, and blah, blah, blah. And that's always kind of stuck out to me as a moment of my own faith kind of asking me to be a lot bigger than I want to be. And in a way, I kind of read that moment with Ilya as that God isn't giving him this simplistic sort of like, now your arm is back, and like, it doesn't end happily. But I think that there's a way of seeing that as maybe part of a journey of faith, as opposed to like a refutation.
I think I agree with Riley. I feel like a lot of people look at God through whatever religion they're a part of, almost like a fairy godparent,
Yeah.
like, please make this thing happen for me. I wish for this. And I've always felt like that's like a weird view of like what the role of God might be, is not to like grant individual wishes, because if it was, just be like, I wish for world peace, I wish for no hunger for anyone, and everyone lives happy, cancer does not exist anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that's the point being, I think that's the moment with Ilya here, is like he is given the option to reframe his belief. It is not just like, I have been good, so God will grant my wish. It is like, you get this whole new journey, and it is up to Ilya to do what he will with that info. By the end of the game, we see he's gotten pissed drunk and bought a trumpet, so it's like, maybe he hasn't applied.
Good and bad.
Yeah, maybe he hasn't applied the right lessons yet, but we're holding out hope for him. But like, I do think this is a moment where Ilya is given the option to reframe his belief system, and not just look at a higher power as like Cosmo and Wanda.
Because you could see something. Yeah, I mean, it's weird they call it a trumpet. It's not a trumpet, but it looks like a trombone, but doesn't have a slide. I don't think.
It's just kind of a horn. It's like a horn that they would have in like a Bosch painting.
Yeah.
Just
like you could see that as like quite beautiful, and he's gonna move on, but also, yeah, he gets stupid drunk and is a scumbag about it. So like, it's. Yeah, it is complicated.
But I mean, Indika is given a similar moment at the end of the game, right? Like where she is shaking the cadet for, I don't know, it seems like it's up to the player to decide what her wish in that moment is. And it seems like I think like a lot of people read that ending as sad, but I think it's like a kind of hopeful ending. Like she's given the chance to like love herself in a way, like at least as I see it, like she stops being the monster in the mirror. It seems like they're both like being stripped of what they thought religion was. Does that make sense? I feel like I stumbled through what I was saying there, but like,
yeah, I kind of was like a bit disappointed, I guess, by that. But again, coming from my own perspective, I think, we see her shake the cadets and all of the points. I thought they were coins. Your little faith points come out, and it kind of, I guess I don't inherently agree with the idea that like those faith points are like worthless, and I guess like I wouldn't, but
I feel like we should spell out kind of what happens, which is that at the end, I mean, and there is that prison sequence. Let's talk about that quick and then get to the end. So basically, Ilya's arm does not get reattached. They come out. Indica is arrested. There is this walking section where we hear about the Scythe Man who was killing children to send them to heaven. She's put in prison. She ends up kind of like she's begging the prison guard to get out, and ends up doing some sort of like sex act for him in an attempt to get out, which he denies. But in the
middle of this, we get an unbelievably good cutscene where Indika and the devil
right, yeah,
are
so
falling.
it doesn't show whatever they end up doing. Instead, it is Indika kind of plunging into the abyss and having this conversation with the devil where she's kind of saying it's over, it can't get worse than that. And the devil, being a relatively cool guy about it, like is not telling her that she's going to go to hell forever, but just kind of saying like, evil, good, like what are you going to do about any of this? And you are seeing, as she's falling, all her like XP points that you have gained over the course of the game are kind of leaking away. I don't remember any like specific lines from this scene, but Blake, were there any that worked for you, or did you just like the kind of imagery of it?
I think I like the imagery of it and the message, but like I also don't remember the lines. I also was playing this at like 10:30 last night, so unfortunately some things have disappeared out of my brain.
And so then, she finishes her endless fall. The prison guard says, no, you're still not going to get out of here. And then you have this scene where you kind of, honestly, it's like a Resident Evil scene where you see the devil like crawling into the cell and jumping on him, and she runs away. And then as she's running away, you can kind of see that a cabinet has fallen on the prison guard, being kind of like, okay, so she pushed it over on him rather than...
Not to call out the Deus Ex Machina or whatever the hell this thing is here, but like, why is there a china cabinet in a prison cell?
Right?
Like, what are we doing here, folks? Like,
maybe it's not. Maybe it's more of a closet.
Yeah,
it's not a whole prison-y apparatus.
I did think in that story about the Scythe Man, the original, like, the inciting incident is like a cabinet falls on the guy's son.
Oh yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's related. Then for the end of the game, you said that most of the interesting camera work happened in the cutscenes.
Except for this.
But
yeah, right.
This end cuts to first person for like the last part of
and
the game.
And it looks like
which
fucking
is
Resident Evil 8. It's gorgeous when it goes.
Yeah, it looks really good. And it is... We talked about in our Max Payne series that Max Payne has that line during a nightmare sequence where he says, like, I felt like a ghost hovering outside my own body, like watching myself do stuff. And we were like, oh, what a good description of like a third-person video game. And I do like the idea that something has changed within her that has caused her to literally see the world differently, where like no longer maybe does she see God watching her from like behind her back, but we're like seeing through her eyes. I just think it's cool. Another thing that is like unremarked on by the game, but kind of leaves you to draw your own interpretation from it. She finds Ilya. He's drunk. He's bought a trumpet. He bought the trumpet because he stole and pawned the cadets for like $5. You know, he got nothing for it. 5 ruble. And then she goes into the pawn shop and steals it. And she looks in the mirror and sees that she is the devil. And like the end of God of War 3, where you can just keep punching Zeus until you decide to stop, you can just keep shaking this cadets thing forever. And you can keep leveling up. And the first time I did it, I got to level, like 200, because you can just like keep putting points in it. And then at some point you have to decide to stop, which, and I think, Riley, we probably took the same kind of meaning from this, is Indica basically discovers that the points don't mean anything, and she can like move on with her life because all of these kind of points that are that she finds in like religious actions, she gets all of them and nothing changes, and the only thing that happens is she gets more points. And so I certainly read it as her freeing herself from the yoke of religion, whatever, and now she's kind of free to go on about her life, not thinking about those points anymore.
Yeah, and like that's a real way that people feel about organized religion. And I think I wrote in my review like the idea that we can separate religion from faith, or you could be spiritual but not religious, is like a super modern, very American conception. So like this idea, I think, you said you grew up Jewish, like, you think about like all the rituals and things you got to do and the candles, and you just do them because, like, I don't know, you do it.
Yeah.
And like, so the idea of critiquing that and breaking that like makes sense to me in that context. But I also think that I personally think that there's like more to it than that, but I'm also a sucker and I love ritual. And so like, yeah, I want to do all the silly things.
But Blake, you had, I mean, you kind of said this earlier, but you had like a moderately different take on it?
I think I had the same take. I just think I might have been positive on it. But like, I think I felt the same in terms of what the scene was doing.
To be clear, I think it's good for Indica.
For sure.
I think those points were not doing good things for her.
And I think like, it's a fairly simplistic ending to the game, but like I think it is just effective and it landed for me, and I like the imagery, especially in this moment, like being first person, having the mirror, like that's just a very, very evocative way to like to translate what is happening with the character, and just like, I don't know, I like Indica, pun intended, I suppose, being given the grace to like move on with her life and her beliefs and whatever that may be. I can't imagine an Indica 2, nor do I think we need one to like see where she ends up. But like, I do really like the like very obvious metaphor of just kind of Indica saying, damn it, it's not working, fuck it. And like, There's definitely a melancholy to it, but as I've thought more about it, like I've really liked the like positive strain in there for that character. Like I think it's a character I really like, and I like that this is where she gets to end her journey.
Yeah, I like that we don't just, there isn't some, go back to the monastery or not moment or something that would kind of, the game doesn't really doesn't turn it back on you to make you weigh in on its message, which I think is good.
I'm glad that the credits ended and I went back to the main menu.
Yeah.
I think there is so much, especially in the kind of in the repeated rituals of I need to do this or the world is going to end, and that is kind of in that the book that I referenced earlier about Judaism and OCD, it is those two things kind of combining of I need to wash my hands because I feel like the world is going to end, and now I can attach this to a feeling that God is going to end the world if I don't do this. And so her just having, coming to that realization of it's not going to end. I will find a different way of thinking about the reasons that I have to be living and doing things and if I'm good or bad or not. But I do like her freeing herself from just that kind of, it is her finding free will after wrestling the whole game with does free will or not exist or not. It does feel finally she's able to do something that is not because she's either going to get to go to the kingdom of heaven or hell forever.
I should read that story or book you brought up, because I was diagnosed with OCD 6-7 years ago. That is a journey in itself that I had to go on to get better about it. But it's definitely through my own belief system, something I've had to work on, where I'm not turning that into compulsions, and I don't necessarily think that's exactly what Indica is doing, but I see that. I see myself in that way in that game, where Indica is having to not be mature about her belief system, but be rational about who she is. Does that make sense? She has to understand how she actually fits into her own belief system rather than what she has been told is her belief system. And I really appreciate that, because I think if you are going to be a spiritual person, or you are a spiritual person, that's a necessary journey to go on, to be maybe Catholicism or Christianity or whatever the case may be doesn't work for you, and you figure out how your belief systems and your religion and your spirituality do actually benefit your life beyond in Indica's case, the tedium of it, where clearly she was being put off by this whole experience.
Yeah, it's a whole thing which is called deconstruction, which is really popular among evangelicals and ex-evangelicals, and it's a whole thing. Because it seems like she joins the convent because of the stuff that happened with the guy, was my sense, that it wasn't her idea. Yeah. And so there's something, she's trying to make it work and can't. So I think it kind of opens the door a little bit to that struggle. Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than her feeling like her only path is something that she is bad at, where it feels like she's I have to be a nun and I'm terrible at being a nun, so I guess I'm just a failure as a person, is kind of it seems like where she starts. And so ending somewhere with a healthier understanding of the world than that is undeniably a positive swing for her.
Yeah, it's a sad ending, but it's not, I guess.
Sad ending with the potential for a happy outcome later. ...
question.
Yeah. I think this game fucking rocks. I'm so glad it exists and we played it. I think it's just cool that a AA game like this that is very singular, if very messy and confusing and clunky and kind of annoying to play. I'm just stoked. Indica's out there. This is a something rotten ass game if there ever was one. I'm really glad we did this.
It's been such a good time it's such a horrible time in the games industry, but it's been such a good time for indie games, and it feels weird to say I don't know how to hold all those things, but I think even in the face of so much awful trash, we're still getting these very cool games, and I think that we're seeing these unique, interesting experimental games get attention that maybe they wouldn't have like otherwise,
sure.
which I think is cool.
Riley, have you played 1,000 Times Resist yet?
No, people are talking about it like
Oh,
I've been playing
it's
Lorelei
good.
and the Laser Eyes like intently with my friend, which I've been enjoying.
1,000 Times Resist also has some stuff to say about religion, though.
I should check it out.
Not as much like this is about Christianity.
Do you pronounce? Is it
Indica.
times? Is it? I wrote an article with this. I didn't realize recently that the use of X in like weeb anime, you don't say the X. I've always said the X. So is it
I
1,000
think
resist?
you do say times, but I'm not confident in that.
That's one of those things where I feel like you'd go on a podcast and you'd be about to mention the game and then realize you don't know how to pronounce it,
Right?
And just kind of panic. So I respect that. No, yeah, there's so many good indie games out there, which is exciting.
Riley, is there anything that you are dying to say about Indica that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think that, you know, I wondered if I brought, again, like I said before, like I don't want to be like, I wish it were this, which is just like crappy to do. It's really cool to see a game grappling with religion in this way. I think the game is like beautiful and weird, and yeah, I think it's very cool.
It's a big year for nuns. Hold on, I just want to talk about this. It's a big year for nuns. We got Immaculate. We got the first Omen.
Oh, yeah.
Hell, a year ago we had Immortality. Now we have what's this game called? Indica. Like, nuns are back, baby. This is huge. So shouts out to all the nuns, friends of the show.
Specifically, I titles with nuns.
Yeah.
Immaculate. I mean, I guess Immaculate makes sense. Immaculate, Indica, Immortality.
Chelsea Immaculate or First Omen?
No,
Not really.
I don't like
not really
horror
worth
much.
watching either of them, but
Yeah.
just curious.
Riley, thank you so much for coming
you,
on Something Rotten. I truly cannot think of someone that I would have rather had on this podcast to talk about. People can find your Twitter at RC MacLeod. Obviously, you're writing for Aftermath, which, hey, get that annual bundle. It's it's cheap. That's what I have.
Come subscribe to my website that I run. I think I made this joke on Twitter, but I will personally count your money at the end of every month. I do all of the business, and so
You all just started doing freelance pieces, right?
Yeah, we did. We ran our first
That's
freelance
huge.
piece the other week, which is like was one of the. We did a subscriber drive back in March, and that was one of our like goals. And so yeah, we just did that. That was really exciting, and want to do more of that, and want to do more of everything. So yeah, it's pretty great.
And for everyone who's listening to Something Rotten, next week, maybe next 2 weeks, we'll be covering Hellblade 2. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but play that. And until then, I'm just still thinking about that dog's head going around the water wheel. I don't know about you.
So much.
Folks at home, pray for me that my computer will be able to run Hellblade 2. Please pray for me. Bye.